The courtroom, it was crowded that morning. The case that would be tried had gained national attention, and the broadcaster's cameras captured every detail. Dr. Isabel Nascimento, a 42-year-old black judge, sat in the courtroom to preside over the most challenging audience of his career. The defendant, Caio Oliveira, was a 19-year-old black man accused of robbery. He claimed to be innocent, but everything seemed to be against him. On the prosecution side, Eduardo Vasconcelos, an experienced and arrogant prosecutor, seemed confident that he would get a quick conviction. But there was something strange about the case. The evidence was weak, the testimonies were contradictory, and yet the defense lawyer, Dr. Enrique Duarte, seemed intimidated. When Isabel hit the gavel to start the session, she felt a shiver down the spine. She had already seen this scenario before. A young black man being tried without concrete evidence, an ambitious prosecutor, and a defense lawyer who seemed to have no strength to fight. The trial began, and Eduardo presented his allegations with absolute confidence. This young man was identified by a credible witness. Security video shows someone with similar characteristics fleeing the scene of the crime. We have everything we need to convict him. Isabel arched his eyebrows. Everything they needed? The case was far from solid. The defense lawyer stood up, hesitantly, presenting a weak argument about the lack of concrete evidence. But the judge couldn't ignore something that caught his attention: the behavior of the prosecutor and defense lawyer. They exchanged complicit glances. Isabel, he felt, a knot in his stomach. Was there something else going on behind the scenes of that trial? Was she facing a scheme of forged convictions? Isabel watched carefully while prosecutor Eduardo Vasconcelos continued his argument. He spoke with absolute confidence, as if the defendant's fate had already been sealed before the trial even began. But something, it didn't feel right. The prosecution's key witness, a merchant named Roberto Almeida, took the witness stand. Eduardo approached with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Roberto, can you confirm that you saw the defendant at the scene of the crime?" The man cleared his throat and glanced at the prosecutor before responding. "Yes, I think it was him." Isabel narrowed his eyes. "Color?" The merchant was visibly uncomfortable. "Well, it was dark, but he looked like the boy over there." The promoter quickly tried to intervene. "Then we can conclude that—" "We haven't concluded anything yet," Isabel interrupted, looking at the witness. She saw the merchant swallow hard. On the defense bench, the lawyer Enrique Duarte remained silent, without contesting anything. That one confirmed Isabel's suspicion. She began to notice the pattern. In recent months, several young black men passed through his court, always, with inconsistent evidence and weak lawyers who rarely contested the accusations. Would it be possible that were prosecutor Eduardo and lawyers like Enrique manipulating cases to ensure easy convictions? Isabel took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't act without proof, but also I couldn't ignore what was happening. Then decided to act strategically. Let's interrupt the session for a brief break. Everyone in the room looked at each other in surprise. As the jurors and audience left, Isabel called the police officer responsible for the evidence. "I want immediate access to the court's closed-circuit recordings to see every conversation between the prosecutor and defense attorney since this case began." The policeman's eyes widened, but he nodded. The promoter noticed the movement and approached. "What's going on, Your Honor?" Isabel looked directly at him with a sharp gaze. "Just making sure this trial is fair." Edward got tense, as if he felt something was getting out of control. At that moment, "Isabel, I was sure I was about to uncover something much bigger than a simple legal error." Behind the scenes of the court, Isabel felt the weight of the decision he had just made. If your suspicions were right, she wasn't just dealing with an unfair trial, but with a corruption scheme within the judicial system. Minutes later, the police officer returned with a pen drive in hand. "Here are the requested images, Your Honor." Isabel took the device and went to his office, where a computer technician helped open the files. The videos revealed something startling. In one of the recordings, captured in the court parking lot, Prosecutor Eduardo and defense lawyer Henrique spoke privately. Isabel increased the recording volume. "Just do your part and don't contest anything. The judge already has a history of quick convictions." "What if the judge notices?" asked Henrique, visibly tense. Eduardo riu. "She never gets involved in these decisions. Just keep the theater going and the kid is gone." Isabel's stomach turned around. Not only were they manipulating the case, but they were counting on their supposed passivity to ensure the outcome. She felt a lump in his throat. For years, Isabel fought to get where he was, facing discredit, prejudice, and distrust from their own colleagues. And now I realized that they were trying to use her as a piece of a dirty game. But they forgot one detail. She was not someone who would remain silent. With a racing heart, Isabel picked up the phone and made a direct call to the public prosecutor's office. "I have concrete evidence of trial manipulation by a prosecutor and a lawyer. I want a team here immediately." On the other end of the line, the answer was clear. "We're on our way." When Isabel returned to the courtroom, she was no longer the same judge she had started that morning. Now she had the truth in her hands, and I was about to dismantle the dirty scheme they tried to play on your court. Isabel took a deep breath before returning to the courtroom. Each step seemed to carry the weight of responsibility that now fell upon his shoulders. The prosecution and defense were already in position. The audience murmured, not understanding the sudden pause. Eduardo Vasconcelos, the prosecutor, smiled with the confidence of someone who believes they are in control. Henrique Duarte, the defense lawyer, avoided eye contact. Isabel sat on the judge's bench and banged the gavel. "Before we proceed with closing arguments, there is something that needs to be clarified." The room was silent. The police officer responsible for the evidence entered and handed Isabel a tablet, who connected the device to the court's big screen. The video started playing. The dialogue between Eduardo and Henrique echoed throughout the room. "Just do your part and don't contest anything. The judge already has a history of quick convictions. What if the judge notices? She never gets involved in these decisions. Just keep the theater going and the kid is gone." The prosecutor's voice filled every corner of the court, every word undeniable proof of corruption. Edward stood up suddenly, trying to turn off the screen. "This is a violation! This evidence was obtained illegally!" Isabel looked at him coldly. "Do you really want to talk about illegality now?" Henrique, the defense lawyer, seemed petrified. The public erupted in hubbub and shock. Young Caio Oliveira, the defendant, he had tears in his eyes. For the first time, he saw someone within the system fighting for him. Isabel turned to the police officer in the room. "Arrest order for Eduardo Vasconcelos and Henrique Duarte for conspiracy to obstruct justice and procedural corruption." The policeman approached and handcuffed the two men in front of everyone. Their reputation, it was destroyed, and the case, it was far from over. But one thing was certain. Isabel had made the right decision. She did not allow justice to be used as a weapon against innocent people. And now, no one would doubt his courage anymore. A tribunal exploded in reactions. Some murmured in disbelief, others applauded discreetly. Eduardo Vasconcelos, the corrupt prosecutor, tried to free himself from the handcuffs, furious. "This is absurd. You can't arrest me." Henrique Duarte, the accomplice lawyer, he looked like he was about to faint. Isabel stood firm, his voice resounding throughout the room. "The system you corrupted today began to deliver justice." The jurors, they looked open-mouthed, realizing that the trial they were following was not just about Caio Oliveira, but about an entire rotten structure that was finally being exposed. Gaius, he was still motionless in the dock, not believing what he was seeing. He passed weeks thinking your life was over, who would be convicted even if he was innocent. Now, the real culprits were taken into custody. But Isabel, I still had something to say. She took out a document and held it up for everyone to see. Based on the evidence presented and the conspiracy that was revealed, I am dismissing all charges against defendant Caio Oliveira. This court recognizes his complete innocence. The young man felt the tears fall. He was free. The public burst into applause. Gaius looked at Isabel, still in disbelief. Thank you very much. I thought no one would ever fight for me. Isabel smiled softly. Justice may take time, but it never fails. Outside the courthouse, TV station cameras were all ready, waiting for those involved to leave. The arrest of a prosecutor and a lawyer for corruption would make national headlines. But most of all, the image that would remain marked was that of a judge who refused to close her eyes to prejudice and injustice. Isabel left the court with your head up, because that day, she didn't just do justice. She changed the course of history. Oh, tribunal, I was still in shock. The trial that began as another case of injustice turned into a national scandal. The newspapers were quick to publish the headline, "Prosecutor and Lawyer Arrested for Trial Manipulation. Judge Isabel Nascimento Demands System Reform." Outside the building, a crowd gathered. Young black men held signs saying, "Justice for all," and activists celebrated Isabel's courage. While Eduardo Vasconcelos and Henrique Duarte were taken away by federal agents, the expression on the prosecutor's face had changed. He, who minutes before he was sure of his impunity, now he saw his name being destroyed live on TV. Caio Oliveira. He left the courtroom with his eyes full of tears. His mother was waiting for him in the parking lot, and as soon as she saw him, ran to hug him. "I knew you were innocent, son. I knew it." Isabel watched the scene, feeling profound relief, but I knew that this was not the end of the fight. The following week was summoned to testify at the public prosecutor's office, where he presented evidence that several other cases had been manipulated by the prosecutor. The scandal generated a wave of investigations. Judges, lawyers, and prosecutors were removed, and the government announced a reform in the way trials were conducted. But Isabel didn't stop there. She started working on a social project, helping young black people get free legal assistance so that they would never again be victims of injustice like Caio. Months later, he received an invitation to speak at a university. In the packed auditorium, young students listened to her attentively. She took the microphone and said, "The biggest mistake of injustice is believing that no one will resist it. There will always be someone willing to fight." In the audience, a young black man raised his hand. "Dr. Isabel, you inspired me. I want to become a lawyer and fight like you." Isabel smiled excitedly, because now he knew his fight was not in vain, and that the next generation would continue his legacy. 5 years have passed since the trial that changed everything. Isabel Nascimento became a symbol of justice. After his historic decision, she was promoted to the Superior Court, where he continued to fight against inequalities in the judicial system. But the impact of your choice went far beyond the courts. Caio Oliveira's case generated a national reform, making the review of suspected convictions mandatory. More than 200 cases were reopened, resulting in the acquittal of dozens of innocent people. On a special night, Isabel was invited to receive a tribute. On stage, in front of hundreds of people, was surprised by a special guest. Caio Oliveira, the young man she helped free, took the stage. But now he was no longer the wrong defendant. He wore an elegant suit and held a diploma. "Dr. Isabel, 5 years ago, you saved my life. Today I'm a lawyer, and I'm here to thank you." The audience applauded standing. Isabel, he felt a lump in his throat. Caio continued, "I know that many thought I would have no future, but thanks to your courage, today I can fight so that others have a second chance." The judge couldn't hold back the tears. That night, He realized that his fight was never just about a trial. It was about change a system and give hope to those who never had a voice. And now, she knew her mission would continue through those she inspired. Why justice may fail, but there will always be someone willing to correct the course of history. And Isabel did exactly that.